Hi everybody, I'm going to take you on a quick review of the Etowah Disc Golf Course at Riverside Park. This is hole number 1. It's a fairly short hole that I like to throw a forehand flex line on. Maybe something like a Firebird or a Justice, or I've seen a lot of people have success throwing an understable mid-range or fairway like a Comet or a Stag on this hole. It's a fairly tight fairway with a little bit of a drop off midway. As you can see, there's some rocks here that you'll have to climb over, and the landing area is not huge. It's a fairly short green. Hole number 2 is a very short hole, but it's got some tricky elements here. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of room left or right with all these small trees, and then the actual green is pretty tight with a lot of shoal to the left and a lot of high rocks to the right. I like to play a flex line with something like a stego or a harp here. You can see one of my failed attempts there at the bottom, and you can also throw a turnover shot with a putter or mid-range if you're so inclined. Hole number 3 is the longest hole in the course at 575 feet. It actually holds a lot of water down here on the left, so you really don't want to slip off the tee and throw one down there, but the people responsible have put this nice little man-made rocky path over here to the right that has mitigated a lot of those issues. It's really helpful and very nice of them to do. You want to stay on the fairway in this hole, even if it means you're not going to be super close to the pin off the tee. The woods on the left are also the greens to the first and second holes, and they're kind of hard to get out of. And on the left, it's prone to be very boggy. So you don't really want to go over there because your disc is either going to be hard to find or just generally disgusting because it holds tons of water over there where it's been diverted. It's not actually a huge fairway here. It's only about 80 feet wide, so it plays slightly tunnelish, even though it's pretty open and flat. You can't go very high with your shot. I like to play either a hyzer flip with an understable distance driver like a Sheriff or a King here, or sometimes I'll throw an overstable disc on a low line and wait for the skip. Number 4 here is the signature hole on the course. It is fairly short, but it plays down this hill. I'll take you down this path here. For the less powerful players, you can leave it short at the bottom of the hill, but the grass gets kind of tall there and it stays a little bit wet. So that's why they have this very nice plank bridge over here to the right. There also is OB high behind the basket, and I'll show you where that is in a second. So I find the best way to play this hole is to throw a hard forehand into the cave. It's a very shallow cave mouth with not a lot of room to go long behind it. So if you go into it, the disc will kind of spit back out most of the time. It stays kind of muddy inside the mouth of the cave and on the green here. And they have these nice plank steps carved in to the side of the hill. The course designer Sam Barfield built in a lot of really great touches like that to make it easier to play. And if you happen to go OB, this is the drop zone right there at that top step. You can see the marker. And as you can see, it stays kind of muddy up here. But if you end up in the cave, which I'll show you here, it's not actually that deep. So it kind of boomerangs back out like you can see my pink disc down there. And it's an easy putt from there. Number 5 is one of the harder holes in my opinion. You have this tight, very wooded fairway. It's a perfect hyzer flip with an understable disc hole. It's not terribly long, but it's another one that is kind of low lying, so it stays muddy. You have another plank bridge here, and you don't want to hit a tree early on because it's very deep mud on the left most of the time, and then you've got this little like stagnant creek on the right. Something that will flip up and then end up hyzering just a little bit is great. I like to throw a T-bird or a Stag on a very low line here, or sometimes if my arm's feeling good, a mid-range like a Rock or a Bard. Number 6 is not as tricky of a hole. It's pretty open starting here. You have what used to be a car path for the Rangers back here, a little bit of a bank on the left, and then pretty thick woods on the right. But the fairway is wide enough and the hole is short enough where if you throw something that's either a hyzer flip to turnover shot if you are more of a finesse player, or if you've got a good forehand, you can throw overstable disc on a good fade line here and let it hook up around this tree. I usually try to go with actually something that's probably usually too fast for a hole like this to get the good skip, like a Firebird. You can get really close to this pin, and there's not a whole lot of danger of going long on your skip because of the bank behind it. You just don't want to go long straight. Number 7 is one of the harder ones because, as you can see, there's no true line here. I like to play a backhand anhyzer along the hill on the left. That's the clearest line in my opinion. And if you throw something that can hold an anhyzer to the ground, you can get a pretty good shot there. I've also seen some people throw a really wide line out to the right. There's been a few trees cut down here recently that actually make that line a little more visible, and you can see those cut up over here. That's not a bad way to play it. I tried it both ways when I played the course. This is all in July, or June rather, of 2019, and you can see that the green's actually pretty great. It's pretty open. There's a few trees and hills, but it's not a bad putt. Now this hole is trickier than it seems. It's a very short hole, less than 200 feet, but it's straight up the hill, so it plays more like 250. So I like to throw either understable mid-range or even sometimes a fairway driver because the tee pad is so short, and throw it on a hyzer flip line and let it fade into the basket. This one's got multiple positions, and they do change the basket location. I think right now it's in the longer configuration. The lower one is closer down to the ridge where that fallen tree is. This one can leave you some death putts because of the steep hill, so you kind of want to, if you're going to miss close, because if it catches an edge, it can be a really long recovery. Now this one's really interesting. It's another very dramatic up and down hole with one of the shortest tee pads I've ever played from. There's no room for a run up at all. You just kind of have to stand and deliver on it. I like to throw something like a stego on an anhyzer line and let it flex back. I've had a lot of success doing that on this hole. I've also seen some people who throw really great putter touch shots with things like a Nova and a magnet, something like that, where it'll flip up and then just sit down, because there's this one awkward small tree off the tee that you have to either decide to hyzer flip or anhyzer around, and that kind of shapes your shot. There's no just straight at the whole line here, especially considering the tee pad's very short. It also has a couple different paths to get up to the basket, but I like taking this wider line. It's a little bit easier on the knees, and this is where you're starting to get into the real hilly part of the course. As you can see, if you go long off the back, it can be kind of painful. Now this is another one where it's not quite poke and hope, but it's a little difficult because it's a narrow fairway. So if you play through this gap on the left, you have a pretty good shot at the tee, or you can hyzer it off to the right. This is another one with a very wide but short tee pad, and it's a short hole, but it plays very sharply down the hill. So I like to play a stego or a harp on a steep hyzer line and just let it chainsaw down through this gap on the right side of the trees that you kind of see here, and that's the best line here. If you try to go to the left, there's a whole lot of room for error. That's a pretty steep drop off, and there's not as good footing, so you don't want to be throwing a second shot from there. There's a decent landing area, but it's not super wide. It's pretty long, so if you kind of throw it into this pit here, you have more room for error. So if you see over on the left here, there's some planks where you can kind of catch your balance, but it's the back of the mountain where it stays pretty shady, so if it's been raining, it's pretty easy to slip here. So be a little careful coming down that edge. As you see, if you go long on this hole, it can be really uncomfortable. It can roll away a lot. This is a very interesting hole. It plays along this access road, which is not usually in use unless there's someone at that pavilion. You have the OB here, and I'll show you the line right here. So you have the first OB post right there that I'm zooming on, and then there's a cable that goes along the top of the creek bed, so you can never go right of that. I like to play a hyzer with something like a Firebird around this tree, a backhand, right-handed hyzer. Sorry about that whip around there. There was a critter in the bushes that I was curious about. There's a lot of wildlife out here. There's deer, snapping turtles, slider turtles, snakes, mainly harmless ones, but there's copperheads too down by the creek. And there are a lot of squirrels and chipmunks and gophers and things like that too. So be sure to be courteous of the wildlife. So you see, I like to play this into the bank and try to get a putt up near that little stack of trees there, the fallen logs. It's only about 330 feet, so it's doable. This is another one of the short holes on the course, but not one of the easy ones. It throws from the road there, and you can't really see the basket off the tee, but it's off to the right. So you can't actually walk straight to it. You have to walk around the creek and the culvert here over to this bridge and go down through this little bridge here. And if I remember correctly, you'll see some of the wildlife from the park right here. I like to throw an overstable putter or mid-range here, like a Justice or a Stego, and just let it fade right into the target. Yeah, there's those squirrels jumping all around. There's a couple of them on the bridge. And I've had a lot of success throwing that shot. If you go into the creek, there is a drop zone, and I'll show you that in a second. It's down very close to the creek, and there's not a whole lot of room for error here, so if you catch an edge, you're probably getting wet. It's almost better to miss long here and be putting back at the basket because the hill is a little bit steep on the back, so there's a little room for error there. There's the drop zone right down by the creek edge. As you can see, there's not a ton of room. On this hole, you've got a little bit of an obstructive view, and the creek is in play. You're on the other side of the main road here, and I'll show you. You're actually right on the bank of the Etowah River, which is up enormously right now. They're letting a lot of water out of Lake Allatoona, so it's moving pretty quickly, but it doesn't really come into play on the hole unless you happen to get terrible luck. I like to throw something overstable on a flex line here, but a low one, like a Justice or maybe a Firebird, and let it dig into the back of the hill behind the basket. If you're a lower powered player, it's a good idea to just try to get it over the bridge. I have a couple friends I play with that 250 is a really good shot for them, and they just try to throw a flex line with an understable disc and get it up over this creek here because it's just deep enough and steep enough to where it's really uncomfortable to dig a disc out. And then I try to leave it on the hill either next to or just behind the pin. Let the overstable disc dig into the hill a little bit and give you a pretty easy putt. The parking lot behind it, I believe, is OB, so you don't want to go too long on this one. The parking lot's just over the little ridge there. This one's kind of tricky because you have those support cables on the telephone pole. I usually play an overstable disc like a Star Firebird that I have that's pretty beat but always comes back, or if I have a T-Bird that's one of the good stable ones, I might throw it on a flat line right here. But I believe the road is OB here, and in the tree line that drops off dramatically, so you really don't want to go left. It's almost better to be short and then lay up than it is to risk fading into those woods over there. So I like throwing the overstable shot, but you got to make sure you put enough on it to where it's not going to end up in that ditch over there, because that's pretty deep. It's got a really cool little pyramid raise there to it. It's not a giant raised basket, but it's enough to change your eye line a little bit, and it's really well assembled. It's very solid and just another little point of intrigue for the course. You can see my disc there was just a little bit short. I had a putt though, but I didn't make it. On this one, it's kind of interesting. There is this weird little like tunnel line, but I wouldn't recommend you throw that. The line here is the wide hyzer line. A good overstable mid-range, or if you're a lower powered player, do a skip shot with an overstable fairway driver is really the way to play this. That little tunnel shot is really, it's there to tempt you, but don't take it. I would recommend coming through this line that I'm following right here on foot and then playing a skip shot through this little gap in the trees. There are some small ones you could hit, but at the very worst you have a look at a 3 instead of going down into that deep ditch and having to try to dig out for a 2 putt rather. And this one's kind of fun. You cross the road and it's a hyzer shot around those trees. I throw a Firebird on this one backhand, kind of similar to how I play that one with the OB by the creek. Just kind of aim just to the left of that tree on the right hand side near the road and let it fade in. It works pretty well for me. I've seen people do it with a mid-range if they've got really good power and throw like a rock or something like that here. I've also seen lower powered players throw their stable distance drivers here and have some success as well. So there's a few different ways you can play this hole. As you can see, it's getting into the evening now and a little bit twilighty, but I would be cautious. There are some big rocks, short and long, these fairly good sized boulders. You don't really want to gouge into those. It can mess up your disc pretty good. And this is 18. It's kind of the mirror image of number 3. It's the other par 4 on the course, although this one is only 404 feet. You got a tree down right by the beginning of it to walk over, and it's got a little bit of a low-lying spot, so there's this little wooden bridge path here. So this is a 400-foot shot, which a lot of times isn't a par 4, but this is just a narrow enough fairway with enough tree cover to where it makes it play more like a legit par 4. You really can't make a whole lot of mistakes here, and I can 2 this hole sometimes. You know, throwing it that far, a 400-foot shot's not a big deal for me, but getting it on a good line through these trees where it's not going to skip either into the muddy bog on the left or off into the practice area, which is on the other side of these trees on the right, is a little bit of a tricky proposition. I like the construction of this hole. It's not the hardest hole in the world, but it's got a lot of little pieces that make you think. And that's kind of the signature thing of Etowah Park as a whole. It's not a terribly, terribly difficult play, but there's something to consider on every hole that's a little bit different. I had a pretty good drive on this one. I had you see my blue Warhorse there. I threw it really low and relied on a skip, and it just didn't get up there quite enough because it's kind of muddy. This is the practice area. It's got 2 baskets you can throw to, plenty of room if there's a few people out there. Overall, Etowah is a great play, and I would recommend you go out there as soon as possible. Thanks for watching.